Welcome to Dear SQL DBA, a podcast and YouTube show for SQL Server developers and database administrators. I'm Kendra Little. I am really still excited that I launched SQLworkbooks.com last week. It's a new website with SQL Server training videos, and I launched with one video called Troubleshooting Blocking and Deadlocks for Beginners. It's totally free to enroll in that class right now. So if you haven't been over there, go ahead. You can enroll, get 6 months free. I've had a bunch of folks enroll already and a bunch complete the course too, which is super fun and exciting to see people using it, start getting some feedback on it. I will be very soon launching a new course on there called Tuning Problem Queries in Table Partitioning. That will also be free when I open it up. So check out SQLworkbooks.com and look out for updates about the new course in the next few days. It's last days, sort of last chance to sign up for my one-day index pre-con in Lisbon, Portugal. I'll be teaching how to tune indexes with execution plans in one day, and then I'll be giving 2 classes at SQL Saturday, Portugal, which I'm really looking forward to. Everybody I know who's been to SQL Saturday Portugal says it's a fantastic event. Great speakers, great organizers, beautiful city. After the SQL Saturday, I'll be heading down to the Algarve coast in southern Portugal. Hopefully I said that right. I haven't looked up the pronunciation, but I have looked at a lot of photos and read a lot about it. Beautiful coastline, great seafood. I'm really looking forward to heading to Portugal. I've never been, so I'm very excited. I feel very fortunate to get to go. So on to today's question. I've gotten a couple of variations of this question, and I'm finally going to get to answer it. Here it goes. Dear SQL DBA, I moved into the role of DBA about a year ago. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm worried. I'm worried that cloud adoption may move more and more companies away from SQL Server for reasons like cost. And I'm also worried because as the transition to the cloud becomes more commonplace, maybe the DBA job will become a service included in that offering. Maybe DBA or database as a service will get rid of the DBA job. So what does this mean for DBAs? Well, I actually answered this email with a couple of questions. I asked, what made you decide to be a SQL Server DBA specifically? I also asked, what do you like about being a DBA? What parts of your job do you wish you could do all the time? And then finally, are you curious about cloud technologies, or are they uninteresting? And I think if you're worried about the future of the DBA job and you are a DBA, these are the questions to think about. Why did you become a DBA? What do you like about being a DBA? And are you interested in cloud? Because I think they'll help inform your direction and how you approach and strategize your career. It is really important to strategize your career as a DBA because there's a lot of different ways it can go. We have been hearing that DBA jobs will go away for as long as I've been a DBA. I've heard about things that will kill off the DBA job and mean that we won't need DBAs anymore. When SQL Server 2005 came out, all the marketing was about it being self-tuning, right? It was already sentient enough to take care of itself. And then all of the jobs taking care of SQL Server were going to be outsourced to X country, and then they were going to be outsourced to Y country, and then a different country, offshore, near shore, whatever shore. And then finally, supposedly DevOps would mean that we wouldn't need DBAs anymore because everything would be run by Stack Overflow type teams where the developers also run all of operations and everyone kind of is incredibly smart and everyone knows everything. Well, I haven't seen any of these things kill off the DBA job. It can be hard to get a DBA job, but part of that is that folks want experience a lot of times when you get into a DBA job, and you can't just go to school to get to DBA. So I think a lot of the struggle I've seen with getting a DBA job isn't the availability of the jobs, it's the availability of candidates with experience. And it can be hard to get your foot in the door because it is experience-based. But I haven't seen the jobs go away. SQL Server isn't yet completely self-tuning. In fact, as SQL Server grows more and more complicated, having someone who knows what to avoid and what works really well is more and more valuable. Outsourcing has happened. I mean, definitely we have global companies now, but there's still a need for DBAs in multiple countries to help manage it. And in fact, I think it's easier to work remotely now, even within the same country as a DBA. You know, it's easier to, in some ways, outsourcing kind of opened the door to not everyone has to be in the same building all the time. But outsourcing it's not just easy and perfect to have remote people manage the most critical stuff in your business, right? People figured that out too. And there's plenty of room for database administrators in companies that do outsourcing and in companies that don't. As for DevOps, I mean, I actually really have enjoyed working with every DevOps teams I've ever worked with. It has, in some companies, it seems to have gotten rid of testers, like the QA department. In many companies I've seen kind of got wiped out, but the DBA teams didn't because of the critical nature of the data and the complexity of performance and availability technologies. Having an expert in that area remains very attractive to it's very hard to be like Stack Overflow. There is, though, I think, a DBA job that is going away. It's been going away for a while, and I think it's going to keep going away. The old school DBA, sort of the classic cartoon definition of a database administrator as just someone who installs the SQL Server, configures SPconfigure, sets up backups and maintenance, CheckDB index maintenance, and deals with the security. And then just sort of stays in their cube silently, making sure it's turned on. That DBA job has been going away, and it will continue to go away, in part because of the cloud, but in part just because it's just not that valuable to have any IT workers anymore who aren't big communicators. All of IT and operations is becoming more cognizant of the need to be more, I hate to use the word nimble, but to be able to react quickly, to be able to script, to be able to talk to the customer about their business needs and adapt to it. It's not just a Dilbert world anymore. The DBA's number one customer, increasingly, is developers. Developers building new flexible applications is more and more important. And developers do need database administrators. The cloud really does let developers be creative and embrace new technologies, and that's fantastic. It does not necessarily mean that less SQL Server will be used. So part of our questioner's concern was that cloud adoption might drive people to cheaper technologies. Well, it may, but even without the cloud, people might go to cheaper technologies too. I mean, there's always Postgres. And Postgres has a lot of capabilities and there's many cool, interesting data platforms, and there have been for a long time. And yes, they are growing. Even as developers do explore new technologies. And one of the cool things about the cloud is that it really can allow you to mix different technologies together and play to the strengths of each. SQL Server is a strong relational database with very cool features for performance and availability, and it still has a lot of strengths, the cloud offers more options to make it cost effective than you get right out of the box, in part of because some things are offered as a service. There's things like elastic pools in Azure where you can pay for performance of a whole pool of things, for example. But I really do think that the way that Microsoft is changing over the last few years and opening up their cloud, saying you can run every technology in our cloud, you can run ours, but also doing things like saying you can run SQL Server on Linux. Now, this is a really interesting development too, because this isn't specifically about cloud. It does mean that you can go into Azure and build a VM running Linux and put SQL Server on it. But it also means you can do that outside of the cloud too. And Microsoft invested developer time, lots of marketing time into this. And they have really changed a lot over the last years in terms of not being threatened by other technologies. And I think this is true, figuring out that making your competitors your enemies isn't necessarily the way to sell more. Sometimes the way to sell more is to work well with your competitors and make everything grow and make everything more useful and help your customers do more and bring them into your cloud with a mix of technology. I think this is good for Microsoft. I think it's even good for SQL Server specialists because existing applications, I don't think are all going to migrate away, and making SQL Server be supported on different operating systems, available in lots of different cloud mixes, I think this builds its attractiveness and gives it more staying power. I would be more worried about SQL Server if there weren't so many cool cloud options with it. And there are cool cloud options with it in Google's cloud, in Amazon's cloud, in Azure, right? So I think that's all actually pretty good news for the existing SQL Server specialist. Developers are still going to need help. And this is not a hit on developers. When I think about, man, what must be the challenges about being a developer these days? Like, think about that problem if you're not a developer. If you are a developer, you probably already have an opinion on this. But the scope of what you need to learn with all the different technologies is massive. And this isn't even just technology specific to databases. This is every type of technology that you could use to build an application. The scope of things that you can be interested in and that you can learn as a developer is huge. So even when you're pretty settled on specific technologies and you're building an application, developers have so much to worry about that they're still going to want someone to ask for help with the database that they're using. And a lot of the times they're still going to be using SQL Server. So what's going on in the database? Like, something looks weird. Is it the database? Like, answering that question actually isn't that easy when you need to know about 50 different technologies. Why is this slow? Can we speed this up without changing the code? I mean, that question is huge already. It is an enduring question that I believe will serve us well throughout many years. Is there a way to do this more cheaply? And even just always that question of, should we be doing this another way, or can we roll our own? Business owners are still going to want database specialists like SQL Server professionals as well. They want to know from a specialist perspective, is there something that our developers aren't seeing? They're going to want to know about all those acronyms like service level agreements, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, all the three-letter words for those things. They're going to want someone with specialization in the database to be able to answer those with authority. Is the data secure? And I do think the question of, should we be in someone else's cloud or should we be running our own? That question is going to persist and keep coming up. A long time ago, remember, well, this is it feels like a long time ago. I guess it depends on your scale of time. I remember when we heard that my CTO said every server we have will be virtualized someday. Every single server. And I remember at the time it was sort of early days and I was like, really? Because our SQL servers were very performance sensitive and we used very large servers. These days, the size of servers we're running isn't actually that hard to virtualize because technology has changed a lot. And these days, there are many environments where everything is virtualized, but there's plenty of environments where they still don't use virtualization for performance reasons. And there's even some high-end SQL Server performance features that are designed to work with bare metal technology, local storage type stuff. There's also the rise of containers and a move away from virtualization. And throughout this all, of course, we still need DBAs, but the question also comes up. Like I've had folks who are at companies where they virtualized everything come to me and be like, the leaders of the company want to know, should we not virtualize the SQL servers now? Should we go back? Is there a compelling reason to? And worked through that problem. These questions are still, I don't think they're going to go away. And I don't think cloud makes the questions go away. I think cloud makes the questions more apparent, more interesting, and it will continue to do so. There are areas you can really specialize in as a SQL Server DBA, and I don't think they're going to change dramatically. You can be more of a systems administrator or, kind of platform DBA, where you get to know SAN technologies pretty well. You get to know virtualization. You may get good at scripting and PowerShell because you manage large environments. You set up high availability and disaster recovery. I don't think the cloud is going to make that go away, but the cloud can be part of that because the cloud could be your failover region. What are the options for doing that? How do you, that is really an area that is more and more exciting. I think it's always been exciting, but, continues to be. Performance tuning and architecture, also huge. And so how do I make this critical workload as fast as possible? What code design patterns work best for different high transaction workloads? How do I use these new column store indexes? Should I use Hekaton, this new in-memory stuff? What is the best way to do this? What are the risks of it? How do we troubleshoot when it goes wrong? What kind of data loss could we be exposed to if we use X, Y, and Z? Really important questions, and cloud becomes just part of it. What if we do use database as a service? What are the performance possibilities and impacts? What can't we do with it? Where are the gaps? Cloud, I think, just enriches these specialization and gives you more options based on your interest. Operations is also a specialization. And some folks forget this. I don't forget this because of two guys who I worked with when I first started at a .com in Seattle. I met different people in different parts of IT. And there were two men who worked on what was essentially like a proprietary Hadoop-like cluster. This was before the term NoSQL got thrown around. Like they were basically managing this many, many terabyte implementation of a NoSQL database that was critical to the business. And these two men, when they started working with computers, they told me they started back in the punch card days. Right? The original skills they used were for actually operating the computers we no longer used cards at this point. But they were really, really good at operations. And over the course of their careers, they had just adapted their skills to different technologies. And they were great at managing those clusters. They learned a scripting language, that wasn't super applicable to other things. And they learned all of the quirks and figured out, okay, we need to meet these service level agreements. How do we make it happen with this cool technology? And I actually found that really inspiring. I was like, no matter how much technology changes in my lifetime, I'm going to be able, they were able to adapt, and I can, kind of use them as my mentors, and I can adapt. Just look at the problems that need to be solved. There are people who can just change the type of problem they're working with, but continue to use those operation skills. Another interesting example is actually business intelligence in the SQL Server area. Not long ago, the changes in BI capabilities kind of, underwent a revolution when all this Power BI stuff came out. And I remember being at a keynote at the past conference. I think it was a keynote. I'm not sure if it was a keynote, but there was a really exciting talk about getting data in Excel. Like you point Excel at the cloud and you can get all your data, and it's the engine of the devil. It's so fast. But at the time, I remember, I've never worked heavily in business intelligence, but it seemed to me like there was this community of people who for a long time had been helping customers, internal and external customers. They built analysis services, cubes. And now this was like the revolution that was like, you don't need to wait for the cubes to build anymore. You just need Excel. And you, the business user, can get everything you need. So who needs all those people to build cubes anymore, right? Well, it turns out those folks are just fine. As far as I've observed, the business users want their business intelligence team like more than they ever did, because they want data and they want to use the data and they want to manipulate the data, but it's not easy. It's not easy to do everything you might want. And you need expert advice on what you can do, how fast you can do it. Is it better to go with the old technology? Is it better to go with the new technology? Do you want a mix? Do you want it in the cloud? Do you want it on-prem? Could we be doing better? Could we be doing more? The folks in the community I know who used to specialize in cubes, they're perfectly happy and have adapted to all this new technology. Their field is more interesting and more exciting now and this is from someone just sort of outside of that area looking in. It looks better than ever to me. So I think that cloud is very similar, and a lot of the cloud technologies we get is similar for the DBA, and really don't fear the change, see it as growth, which is what I see it as. If you are just starting out, so our question came from someone with 1 year of experience, right? They've already landed that DBA job. They've been in it for a while. I do think if you're just starting out, I wouldn't just focus on Microsoft SQL Server. That is not a comment about Microsoft SQL Server, though. That is a comment about the time that we live in. Now is a time when all sorts of different technologies are emerging, and there's so much you can learn and do. And if you're just beginning, this is just a life thing. Don't focus on any one thing for too long. Try different things. Find out what you're good at, because what you think you like may not really be what you like. Don't settle down too fast with any one technology if you're just starting out. It's go out and date a lot of different technologies. There's really not a lot of downside to that. And decide, do you want to be a generalist? Do you want to be a specialist? And what are really the problems that you like to solve? Now, our questioner got back to me after I asked those questions. And they said, well, I'm an accidental DBA. I come from a support background. And what I like about being a DBA is I like learning about the inner workings of SQL Server and the flagship technologies. I don't like writing reports. They are curious about cloud technologies. So this sounds to me, we didn't go too much into depth, but this sounds to me like you might really be interested in a lot of the intricacies of how do I do high availability? What are my options for mixing in the cloud with that? How do I get the best there's a couple different, you could specialize more in the platform sysadmin style. If you're interested in performance tuning, you could go down that route too. Depends how much you like the T-SQL and want to interact with that. But either way, The cloud, I think, is part of your job security and part of the brightness of your future since you are interested in it. Even if your company right now isn't very involved in cloud, you can say, hey, I want to go to this conference or this training. They have some content on how to use SQL Server in the cloud, and I want to find out about it so I can help identify when we have a good opportunity, and I can get us ready for when that may make sense. Be the leader in this area. Get to know the strengths and weaknesses of managing SQL Server in the cloud, just as part of your mix. Because I think you're right that it will continue to be relevant and it will help you in your career to know that. Now, I have to acknowledge, it is possible that the robots will take our jobs. It is possible that the robots will take everyone's job. Even the developers, even possibly the CIOs. It is completely true that eventually everything may become self-managing, and that even the light bulbs in our house, which will all have Wi-Fi and be communicating with Skynet, that they will all control our lives. Now, I can't change that. But until that happens, until the computers take over everything, I think that up until that time, that as data professionals, we're actually in a really good spot as SQL Server professionals. That we are going to be one of the last to be taken over by the robots. Because this question of how do we get the most out of all of this technology is just going to get more and more, because the technologies continue to have more ways to do things that each have their own trade-offs. So my number one piece of advice is look for the problems that you really want to solve at work and go after them, right? Always be looking for what is an interesting problem I could solve, and ask to work on it. Sometimes you don't get told yes, but sometimes you get to work on really cool stuff. When you're looking at work, don't get too stuck on the job title. I was stuck on the job title for a long time. I get it. I wanted this specific job title, but I don't think I realized that the term administrator isn't really, is it that awesome to be called a database administrator? The words just aren't that cool. If you're solving problems that are interesting to you and that you get exciting talking about them and they really help the business, that's worth way more than a job title, and it's going to tell a much cooler story in a job interview and take you more interesting places. You get one life, you may as well get to work on problems that you actually like solving, right? So the future, I think, is very exciting with the cloud. And I think, I don't think the cloud is going to take over everything too soon, at least while we have free will. So thanks for joining me today. If you have a question for Dear SQL DBA, hit me up at littlekendra.com. There is a Dear SQL DBA button up at the top of the website. I'm Kendra Little, and thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you again soon.